Thanks. Well, I'm Frederica Whitfield in the CNN newsroom. Here's what's happening at this hour. The U.S. Army says U.S. forces have now encircled the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, a city of 5 million people. And the first U.S. transport plane has landed at the city's main airport, firmly controlled by U.S. forces. At least 2 more transport planes are on the way. The wounded continue to flood Baghdad's hospitals. One surgeon saying his staff has treated more than 100 people. A true count of civilian injuries is not known, but International Red Cross officials say it could stand at several hundred. Humanitarian shipments have arrived, but the Iraqi city of Qasr is still in dire need of water and medicine. That's the word from a United Nations official who says Qasr's hospital has a vaccine shortage right now. President Bush is set to travel to Belfast, Northern Ireland on Monday to meet with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. They'll discuss progress in the war and review plans for rebuilding and governing post-war Iraq. In Hong Kong, 2 more people have died from severe acute respiratory syndrome. So far, the death toll from SARS is 22 in Hong Kong and 89 worldwide. Continuing coverage of the war in Iraq with Larry King right now.
Thank you, Frederica. Tonight, U.S. forces encircle Baghdad, tightening their grip on Saddam Hussein's regime. And meantime, British troops rumble into Basra, battling toward the center of Iraq's second biggest city. We'll get the latest from CNN's Christian Amanpour and CNN's Nick Robertson, plus diplomatic perspective on post-war hopes from 2 key ambassadors, and a lot more. We begin with Christian Amanpour, who's with us from London tonight. Christian, your overall assessment now as we head into the 3rd week of this event. Where are we? What's the end game?
Well, what's the end game is an interesting one, and I'm sure your military analysts will have a lot more to say on that. But it's true, what is the end game and what will they do now that they're encircling Baghdad? Certainly, when I was there last week in the Basra area, the chief general in charge of British land forces was saying that, you know, we're very patient. We're not going to go in and raise the city. We're not going to go in and get engaged in urban warfare. That is not our aim, and we're going to do it on our terms. And they were constantly probing, going in, doing it as often and as much as they could, and clearly they're stepping up that effort. In terms of what's going on in the political endgame, certainly President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair, the 2 main allies in this campaign, are meeting in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, for what's being called yet another war summit. It's about their 3rd meeting in about a month. And then apparently the post-war situation is going to be discussed. So things seem to be, certainly over the past week, to have moved rapidly. And I guess it's always been a question of, once you storm through the desert, how do you get the big cities, especially since the initial reports of attempting to get them by implosion, attempting to get them by having the people on side and a spontaneous uprising, have not materialized at this point.
Nick Robertson, who is in Ruwais Shid, that's at the Jordanian-Iraqi border, CNN senior international correspondent. Nick, we've landed a C-130 transport plane at the Baghdad airport, now named the Baghdad airport. Does the end look in sight to you?
You know, it's very interesting, Larry. I talked to one of my sources in the center of Baghdad this evening, and I said, did you know the coalition's landed this aircraft out at the airport? He said, no, they have absolutely no idea. They didn't hear it land. They didn't, there was absolutely no indication. And this is the sort of perception there is in Baghdad at the moment. There's almost a tale of 2 cities. There's the areas on the periphery of the city that the coalition forces control. Those images we see of coalition forces going into Republican Guard areas, clearing them out. And then there's what the Iraqis in the city are seeing. They're seeing an increase in the number of armed fighters on their streets. Indeed, the sources I'm talking to say they're surprised at the number of guns, the number of people with weapons on the streets. Republican Guard fighters, Fedayeen fighters, the Ba'ath Party, the ruling political party, their fighters out on the streets. And many of them, when questioned, saying they're absolutely prepared to continue to fight. So it is a sort of tale of 2 cities, but caught between those 2 cities, if you will, is a civilian community who our sources tell us are very concerned now. They feel that they're getting caught in the crossfire. The hospitals are getting more and more casualties coming in. The civilians say they think the coalition forces are shooting at them. They think that the Iraqi forces are shooting at them, and somehow they're getting mixed up in the conflict. And that is really what's making them very afraid about this situation. And they say they just want the conflict to be over. They just want it to be settled, Larry.
Nick Robertson and Christian Amanpour will be with us throughout this entire hour. They'll be questioning ambassadors and generals. And then we're going to have a major discussion about the media and some of the tragedy that occurs of being the media in this war at the end of the program. So Christian and Nick will be with us throughout. Let's go to Jane Araf in Erbil, northern Iraq. Got some details, Jane, on that friendly fire incident and whatever else you have to report. Jane Araf in northern Iraq.
Larry, Kurdish officials are saying what they believe happened in this horrific accident that killed at least 18 Kurdish fighters and injured 45 was that essentially the wrong airstrike was called in by the United States. Now, this was a convoy of Kurdish officials with a very senior Kurdish military commander who happens to be the brother of the political leader in this part of Iraqi Kurdistan. They were in a convoy approaching the front line, a ridge on the front line, when this bomb dropped. Now, we spoke to special forces on the ground just a few hundred meters away. They say they didn't know what happened. They just looked behind them and heard this loud flash, realized that something very bad had happened, and sent medics back to try to deal with the wounded. Now, the front line that they're on is a ridge. It's still about 80 kilometers, about 50 miles from Mosul, but the special forces there were holding it down. They had retreated earlier in the day when Iraqi tanks approached, kind of a rare sight on the northern front line. They called in airstrikes. They sent across mortars, gunfire, and guided bombs, laser-guided bombs from F-14s, and at the end said they had managed to take out possibly up to 10 Iraqi tanks, and we're still holding that ridge. Larry?
Thank you, Jane. By the way, Jane, one other thing. The son and brother of a key leader in the Kurdish-controlled area of northern Iraq were injured. Is that correct?
They were, absolutely. One of them, Wajid Barzani, had been flown to Germany by U.S. military helicopter. He had been critically injured. The other, the son of Masoud Barzani, who is the de facto president in this part of the Iraqi Kurdistan, was more lightly injured, but a very unfortunate occurrence. Larry?
Thank you very much. Jane Araf in Erbil, northern Iraq. Let's go back to Christian Amanpour in London and Nick Robertson on the Jordanian-Iraqi border. Christian, in London, what are the analysts, what are they telling you about how well this war is going? Is it just about what they expected? Worse? What are they surprised at?
Well, you can imagine that over the past 2 weeks, and certainly I've been away in Iraq for most of those, but the headlines have been seesawing. You know, at the beginning, there was a great deal of resistance on the ground in Iraq. People did not expect it, and I can tell you from first-hand experience interviewing the soldiers that I was with on a daily basis, they were incredibly surprised that the Iraqis fought. You know, I think they had been given the impression, certainly, by the rhetoric coming from the two capitals, London and Washington, that this was...
I think we'll have time to really focus on trying to find weapons of mass destruction, but I don't think that you can do both on a parallel track to say we're going to remove the regime and we're going to find the weapons of mass destruction. I think there's a part A, which is to remove the regime, then part B, to go in and find the weapons of mass destruction. And I do think they'll find them, by the way.
We have something new here called National Security Presidential Directive 17, which is our new foreign policy that we preemptively go into countries we think could be a threat. And this past week, you had Donald Rumsfeld basically saying that Syria and Iran may have done hostile acts by aiding and abetting Iraq in this effort. Should we use that initiative to go into other countries preemptively if the Iraq mission, when the Iraq mission turns out to be successful?
Well, I think, Alan, I've been disappointed if it proves out that, and from what I heard starting last week, I guess the first of this week actually, we heard Secretary Rumsfeld and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that Syria was assisting Iraq in doing things to make it bad for our soldiers, for the coalition. I think those things will be dealt with by our military folks. I think they sent the right message to say, don't do this. You know, you will pay if you do. But I think, you know, Alan, we have to stay focused right now on Iraq. We are too close to bringing this regime down to get into, you know, Syria, North Korea, you know, all those different things. I think our military folks are going to stay focused on the job.
Well, it's relevant to Iraq in that Syria's been accused of sending in night goggles. Iran has been accused of
in Iraq. With me now to talk about that from Washington, D.C. is Jed Babin. He's a former Undersecretary of Defense. Glad to have you here, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks. Good to be here, Joe.
You know, this past week started on a very sour note. If you looked at the media reports, the USA Today, the New York Times, everybody was basically second-guessing this president. Of course, we even had Johnny Apple's Quagmire column, which he writes now in every war. 1 week later, how are things looking, not only for this administration, but obviously, more importantly, for the troops in Iraq?
Well, it obviously looks like we're very close to victory. We're not quite there yet, but our folks are performing wonderfully. Our systems are working as or better than expected, and the folks who are resisting us are quite literally seeing their command structure fall apart around them. There are very few organized units left, and I think those numbers will diminish rapidly as the days go on.
This coming week, how likely is it that, in your opinion, that either Baghdad will fall or that Saddam Hussein and his troops will leave the city?
Well, I don't think that you're going to see either in a neat package, a neatly definable event. I think that by the end of this coming week, you will see that there will be American troops, coalition troops, in each of the major Iraqi cities, Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, Tikrit, and working and traveling around there with fair impunity. Now, having said that, that does not necessarily mean we declare victory and go home, but I think that Saddam's days are down in number to single digits.
Mr. Secretary, take a look, if you will, to what George Will wrote about unconditional surrender, and he wrote this in Newsweek. He said, that war aim is more problematic regarding Iraq than it was regarding Japan and Germany. Then the aim was achieved by almost indiscriminate destruction. Today's war has been called a compassionate conservatism war, waged with what might almost be called delicacy. Do you believe that we're worried a bit too much about being compassionate in the way we achieve victory? I mean, after all, this certainly is not what we did to Dresden or other cities in Germany at the end of World War II.
Sure, but the difference, Joe, is we're here to liberate Iraq, not to incinerate it or conquer it, as we had to do with both Germany and Japan. I think you're going to see that we will win this thing with, I hadn't heard the term compassionate conservatism used as a method of warfare up to this point, but I think that's basically what you're seeing. We are winning with such stunning accuracy that I'm hopeful we do not need to drop that plan when we go into Baghdad and face whatever these so-called Fedayeen forces may choose to throw at us.
I want to show you a quick clip of Secretary Rumsfeld this past week and what he said about an unconditional surrender.
This time will end, and soon. The only thing that the coalition will discuss with this regime is their unconditional surrender.
Mr. Secretary, we're obviously getting obstruction still from the French, from the Germans, from the Russians, who are trying to get in the way of that unconditional surrender. Do you believe this administration, under any circumstances, will yield to what old Europe and Russia desires to end this war?
I don't believe so, and I think it would be a horrible and historic mistake if we did. One of the sure things that you can look at as an indicia of the closeness of our being able to declare victory is the fact that the UN is now trying to meet tomorrow and get its nose back in under the tent. You know, the UN is only good at coming out on the field after the battle, bayoneting the wounded and claiming the benefits of victory. And that's what they're going to try to do. It would really be a historic mistake for us to allow them to do that.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I agree with you 100%. What a difference a week makes. I'll tell you, it looks like the administration, the Pentagon, and all the plans are really helping us turn the corner on this war. Thanks for being with us tonight. Straight ahead, the search for Saddam is on. What will it take to finish him off? We're going to take you inside his secret bunker network when we come back.
Quarter past the hour, I'm Natalie Morales with the latest headlines. Right now, a possible friendly fire incident in northern Iraq is under investigation. Reports say a U.S. warplane bombed a convoy of Kurdish fighters and U.S. Special Operations Forces. U.S. Central Command says at least 3 people were killed, but Kurdish officials say at least 18 died. Central Command says the first U.S. military plane landed at the Baghdad airport under the cover of darkness overnight. It was a C-130 transport plane, and officials tell NBC News it was loaded with U.S. Special Operations Forces and their gear. And the Department of Defense has released the latest casualty numbers of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The death toll now stands at 80 U.S. military men and women, 8 whose whereabouts are unknown, 7 prisoners of war, and 155 wounded in action. And a reminder, we recap the latest headlines every 15 minutes, and you can also get the very latest on the web. Just go to iraq.msnbc.com for complete coverage. Now back to MSNBC Reports Operation Iraqi Freedom.
MSNBC's coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom continues with MSNBC Reports. Here is Joe Scarborough.
Welcome back to MSNBC Reports. I'm Joe Scarborough. Just outside of Baghdad today, Marines uncovered a huge cache of Iraqi weapons and something else that may reveal even more about just what this enemy's capable of. MSNBC's Bob Arnott brings us the exclusive report on what they found.
I'm Bob Arnott. This is a regimental resupply point. This room is filled with grain here for the people of Iraq. There's oil over here for Jordan. This, of course, was all part of the Oil for Food program intended for sick and starving Iraqi peoples. Major, whose hands did it end up in?
The military's. More specifically, probably the Republican Guard, we think, from the uniforms we found here.
Now, you're a lawyer. You are involved in civil affairs out here. You're also a Marine. What do you think about a Republican Guard unit taking food from starving people from themselves and hoarding it?
Well, I think it underscores one of the reasons why we're here to remove this regime. The military, the Ba'ath Party have suppressed the people. They take food from the people, starve them out for their own self-interest.
Now, Major, if you don't mind, we're just going to walk backwards for Jim Bruton. Our cameraman's going to be a little hard here because this is all sort of broken up brick. It's easy to trip, but we're looking at just piles and piles of ammo here. Tell me what kind of ammo we're looking at.
Well, we have a variety of ammo. We have mortars, recoilless rockets, much of the same stuff we've been fighting all the way up to this point in Baghdad.
So this is basically intended to fight American troops. Now, one discovery you and your men made was that some of this ammo came from the military forces of what country?
Jordan.
So how did it get from Jordan to here? Is that a mistake, or is that, well, what's your interpretation?
Well, we suspected links between the two countries for a long time, although it's been denied openly. The proof's in the writing right on the box.
Jim, let's just go in. The proof's in the writing right on the box. Let's just look right at that writing. What it says is Amman, Jordan. Jim, if you come back out here, now is this a rocket-propelled grenade?
That's a mortar right there.
Mortar here?
Be careful about handling it.
All right. 62 millimeter mortar, is it? Or 82? 60? 60 millimeter mortar. These were fired, 4 of those at our position not long ago. Let's just swing around here one more time with the camera. We can see this room here. This is supposed to be a regimental resupply station, but look what you've got. You've got pounds and pounds and pounds of food, some of it from Austria, some of it from Vietnam. All oil for food that's supposed to feed starving Iraqis. Instead, it's gone to the military. The military have gone to ground. They're walking up and down the street here without their uniforms, smiling, waving white flags, going about their business. Well-nourished. Bob Arnott, MSNBC, back to you.
Some good news from Bob Arnott on the front line. Now, earlier today on Meet the Press, Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz talked to Tim Russert about the progress of the war.
It's worth remembering that. We're in the middle of a difficult war, but we've made a lot of progress. Some of the big dangers may still lie ahead of us, so we need to keep a cautious view of the way ahead. But one thing is certain, and that is that this regime is on its way out. It's ended. And the sooner the Iraqi people can be convinced of that, I think the sooner they will stop fighting for a hopeless and ignoble cause. These incredible young Americans, men and women, who are fighting a very fierce and vicious fight, country is proud of them. I think the country needs to be grateful to them. They are helping to free us from an enormous threat, and that is why we're doing it. But I think in the process also we're going to free the Iraqi people.
Do you believe the American people will be safer after the regime in Iraq is gone?
Absolutely. And that's why that's the only reason the President decided to risk American lives to get rid of this regime. It was a danger to us. It doesn't mean we're going to be 100% safe afterwards, but it was a choice of what was the less dangerous course, and I'm absolutely sure we will be safer.
Now, as our troops head further into the capital of Iraq, we're drawing ever closer to taking down the butcher of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein. Now, the tyrant's said to have a maze of underground bunkers throughout the city, places where he can hide in. So how do we find him? With me now is CNBC military analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona, U.S. Air Force retired. Now, he chronicles his own experience with the Iraq military in his book, Ally to Adversary. Rick, great to see you again.
Thanks, Jim.
Let's begin with you describing the underground bunkers and also the tunnels and the networks that he's walking under. I understand that you actually got a look under there when you weren't supposed to. Tell me about it.
A tunnel, not a bunker. Actually, when I was in Baghdad in '88, I stayed at the Rashid Hotel, and underneath the Rashid, of course, is the traditional bomb shelter. There's also a bunker underneath there, and I was in the bunker, and I was taken outside a door, and we were in a tunnel. And this tunnel was, you know, very industrial looking, but it was wide enough to move a car in, and you could see there were tire marks, so they were moving vehicles through there. And I asked, what is this? And they said it's for ministers to move around the ministries, very similar to what we have in Washington for the senators.
Under the Capitol, the Senate, the House, yeah, the tunnels that lead to
I mean, I think
Congress.
that was probably its original purpose, but it provides a very covert means of moving people around from place to place undetected from above.
How extensive is it throughout the city of Baghdad? We'd heard rumors when we took over the airport that actually you had a tunnel from the airport several miles into the city. Do you know if it's that extensive?
I don't know if it's that extensive. I know that in that what we're calling the federal enclave on the west bank of the Tigris there, where the presidential palaces are and most of the main ministries, that tunnel system is very extensive underneath there, and it interconnects all of the ministries and some of the bunkers as well. There's a bunker under virtually every palace.
Okay. Now, the $64,000 question tonight, not only in Washington, but obviously over at CENTCOM, is Saddam Hussein still alive? And also another question, if he is alive, is he still in Baghdad?
Well, those are two great questions. I believe, yes, he's still alive, because that tape I watched the other day and listened to certainly gave me no reason to believe that it was not him.
But could that have been done somewhere other than Baghdad?
Yes. See, that was a very austere location. It seemed to be the same place he did the previous tape from. This could be done in a bunker, say in Tikrit. It could be done in a mobile facility. He does have these mobile command vehicles. Or it could have been done in one of the bunkers in Baghdad. I mean, he moves around constantly. That said, the tape of him walking around Baghdad just didn't pass the test with me.
Yeah, yeah, especially here's a guy who's supposedly very, very paranoid, hardly ever goes out in Baghdad. He was almost nailed in the middle of the night at a secret location. Is this guy going to be walking down an open street in the middle of Baghdad, shaking hands with these people when he knows there are our spies crawling all over Baghdad? It just doesn't seem credible, does it?
And maybe Special Forces snipers, too. So
right.
I don't know that he would actually do that. But he has a history of doing this in times of national distress. He did it in '88, and he did it in '91 when after the invasion of Kuwait. He actually went to Kuwait, made his tour there, did all the shaking of hands. So it's not unprecedented, but I just don't think that's him.
Well, and Lieutenant Colonel, I mean, obviously, if you want to talk about times of distress, this is about as distressful a time
I would think when the world's most powerful military wants you.
Is knocking on your door. All right, well, thanks a lot.
Sure.
Appreciate you being here, Rick.
Sure.
For almost 3 weeks now, we've had a report on deaths of young American troops who gave their lives to help liberate a nation from a ruthless and barbaric tyrant. Tonight, we mourn one of our own, and this is the real deal. Nothing can prepare a parent, a child, or a spouse for the death of a loved one during a time of war. During my time in Congress, I represented 6 military bases, and I attended way too many memorial services for young American heroes. There were soldiers who died while in service to their country, and their lives remind us once again that freedom isn't free. And tonight we can say the same thing about a free press. Journalists like David Bloom and Michael Kelly took assignments in a part of the world where angels fear to tread. And they went to Iraq with hundreds of other embedded journalists to bring the sights and the sounds of the battle zone directly into our living rooms. You know, there was a lot of debate about embedding journalists in the midst of military divisions before the war began, but I'll guarantee you there's not going to be the debate afterwards. Because for too long, administrations of both parties during a time of war have sent out their flaks, their apologists, and they're flat-out liars to spin the war the way they wanted the war spun to the American public. That's not going to be the case anymore. From the opening days of this war, America has watched breathlessly as David Bloom raced northward towards Baghdad with the 3rd Infantry Division. Through pitched battles and through some very fierce sandstorms, we all saw David Bloom the same way that people around NBC have seen him for years. Because David combined an exceptional on-air talent with a remarkable work ethic that placed him at the top of his profession at a very young age. But those who worked with David Bloom say the best thing about him was the fact that inside a great reporter was a really good guy. He was a guy who wasn't a prima donna. He was a guy who knew everybody's name. And he was a guy who knew better than to take himself too seriously. But fortunately for you and me and for all of America, David Bloom did take his profession seriously. He understood that buried somewhere under the press releases and beneath the war plans, there you could find the truth. And he knew that his job was to find that truth and pass it along to you and your family. You know, a political science professor told me in the early 1980s that the Xerox machine would ultimately cause the Soviet Union to crumble from within. And when I asked her why, she said, "It's about information, Joe. The Soviets know that their lies can't survive the light of day. Light is, after all," she reminded me, "the best disinfectant." David Bloom spent his life spreading that light. And tonight, we're all better off because of his dedication to that pursuit of the truth. May our prayers provide comfort, and may God's grace give Melanie and their 3 daughters a peace that surpasses all understanding. We'll be right back.
I'm Natalie Morales, and right now the latest headlines. 8 more U.S. soldiers are at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. The group arrived there earlier today from Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. 1 soldier is in serious but stable condition. Doctors say the other patient's conditions range from fair to good. Britain's Sky News is reporting U.S. forces have captured the city of Karbala just south of Baghdad. Pentagon and CENTCOM have not yet confirmed that report. About 400 Iraqi soldiers have reportedly been killed during 2 days of intense fighting in the central Iraqi city. CENTCOM says the 101st Airborne is sweeping up pockets of resistance inside Karbala as they head north to Baghdad. Former prisoner of war Jessica Lynch now has her family by her side. She's had operations on both her arms, her left leg, right foot, and her spine. She's in intensive care at a military hospital in Germany, but is listed in stable condition. And we recap the latest headlines every 15 minutes right here on MSNBC. Now back to MSNBC Reports with Joe Scarborough.
Welcome back to MSNBC Reports. I'm Joe Scarborough. Now, there's some disturbing reports out tonight that the U.S. troops might have discovered some nerve gas in Iraq. And for more of that, we go to MSNBC's Carl Rochelle. He's at the Pentagon. Carl, what can you tell us about these reports that are just now coming in?
Well, Joe, one thing that is driving some of the reports is the U.S. and coalition forces very anxious to find some sort of weapons of mass destruction to sort of vet, if you will, the premise that established by the U.S. that there were, in fact, weapons of mass destruction there. But it turns out this is not the case here. The earlier reports were that it was likely sarin that came from an embedded reporter who was with the group. Some of the soldiers indicated some symptoms. They had found a drum with an unknown substance in it, but they checked a little later and found out it was apparently just a pesticide. They washed the people down, so there was something there, but it was not sarin gas. It was not a chemical site. And so far, even though they've discovered a lot of paraphernalia to go with it, chemical suits, injectors, antidotes, books on how to, they haven't yet discovered any weapons of mass destruction. Joe's another friendly fire incident early this morning, about 4 o'clock this morning. An American warplane bombed a group of Kurdish fighters and special forces. 1 U.S. Special Forces person killed. This is the scene of that incident. It just one more friendly fire. There were 18 of the Kurdish fighters who were killed in that. The cause is under investigation. There are a lot of airplanes up and a lot of targets, and somebody just made a mistake in that. Another aviation-related note, not an accident. A C-130 went into Baghdad, the newly named Baghdad Airport. It's the first U.S. Forces plane to go in, but it's a Special Forces plane, not a transport. Be a while before they start getting the Special Force or the regular transport planes in there, Joe.
Well, Carl, that obviously is important, not only tactically, but also psychologically. Let me ask you about General Jay Garner. Now, he's the man who's slated to head up the post-war reconstruction effort, and he was supposed to have his debut briefing tomorrow, but it got canceled at the last minute today. Have you heard any word over at the Pentagon on why that happened?
No, no, Joe, and they're not going to tell you why it's just canceled. There is a bit of controversy surrounding any appointment that goes in there. There's always the controversy between whether the State Department gets to pick the person to administer it or the Defense Department. This is the Defense Department guy. But it's also a question in the international community because of concern whether the UN should be doing this or the U.S. And the U.S. is saying, you know, where were you when we're going to administer this when it is all over with? And of course, the policy here is what we're concerned about is a coalition-free government after this is all over with, Joe.
Yeah, Carl, and as we both know, and as most people know in Washington, the battle between the Defense Department and the State Department,
forever.
It's been going on forever, and it will go on forever, and that's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Thank you, Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon. Now, coalition forces are finding that the fiercest fighting in Iraq isn't coming from Iraqi nationals. It's actually coming from militants in other Arab states who've traveled very far to battle Americans. NBC's Chip Reed was with the 5th Marines when they were engaged by a group of these mercenaries.
We're moving on the compound right now.
It was the most intense firefight of the war so far for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. All day Friday, they battled hundreds of fiercely determined enemy soldiers. Finally, with the help of artillery and Cobra helicopter gunships, the Marines prevailed and were stunned to find that many, if not most, of the enemy combatants were not from Iraq, but carried passports from Syria, Sudan, Egypt, Jordan, and Yemen.
They have been dressing in black garb like some members of these terrorist organizations.
R-240.
At the captured compound where the foreigners lived, Marines found enough weapons and black uniforms to outfit a small army.
This is one reason the battle at this complex was so fierce. The opponents were very well armed. All of these weapons are brand new, a massive amount of firepower.
Marines who fought the non-Iraqis say their will to fight was far superior to anything else they have seen in this war.
They actually put up a fight. They're trying. They're here just with one purpose, and that's to kill Americans.
Military sources here say this appears to have been either a haven for anti-American mercenaries or a training camp for international terrorists. Either way, it is proof that American forces in Iraq are up against much more than Saddam's army. Chip Reed, NBC News, with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines.
And this is apparently no isolated incident. We've gotten reports that busloads of Arabs have been coming in from all over the Middle East to fight coalition forces, even pledging to blow themselves up to kill Americans. But with so many Iraqi civilians welcoming coalition forces from Basra to the north, why are these foreign fighters risking their lives for Saddam's regime? Regina Durgan is a senior diplomatic correspondent for Al Hayat newspaper, and she's an MSNBC analyst. Regina, you've obviously been seeing these reports today. What does it say about Saddam Hussein that Arabs from other countries seem to be more willing to fight American forces than even some of Saddam's own in Iraq?
Joe, if you would permit me, since this is the first time I am on air after the terrible tragedy of losing David Bloom, may I just express my sorrow and my condolences to his family and to the family of NBC.
Well, Regina, I know the family and all of NBC appreciates that very much.
Thank you very much. As to why the fighters are there, it's controversial. I don't know. I don't think all of them are there for Saddam Hussein. From their point of view, they would be there for Iraq, and from their point of view, they see that this is an occupation of Iraq and that the United States is becoming a twin with Israel in occupying Arab Arab lands. I'm not so sure they're welcomed by all Iraqis, because I'm sure that there are some Iraqis who would say, you know, leave our pain alone. We've suffered enough, and we don't want somebody to hijack our situation to serve their own agenda.
Well, yeah, and certainly, though, I mean, it has to be disturbing to many in Saddam Hussein's own land to be getting this information from their information minister saying, well, you know, they're not at the Baghdad airport, and then a day later saying, well, we've slaughtered them at the Baghdad airport. And they keep getting this information that what Saddam Hussein's regime's telling them is not actually the truth. Do you think that's actually deflating the spirits of many people who are fighting still for Saddam Hussein when they find out that what Saddam Hussein's regime's telling them is just a flat-out lie?
Well, look, certainly, number one, in wars there is an element of deception that is necessary in most of the wars anyway. Now, there is also another element in what's happening within Iraq. I don't know if it's denial or whether it is on deception on purpose for the morale of the troops. But it's clear that nobody, logical person, expects a military victory of the Iraqi forces over the American and British forces. The problem is then that equation would become more complicated after the end of the military aspect of the operation. When it comes into occupation, if it becomes a long occupation, and if there are appointments of people who are really seen as there to just get Iraq for other purposes, that is when you would have much more of a resistance to the American action in Iraq.
Regina, let me show you what Paul Wolfowitz said earlier this afternoon on Meet the Press along those same lines, and then have you respond to his comments.
I think most of the Arab world understands that Saddam Hussein is a horrible dictator and will breathe a great sigh of relief when he's gone. The challenge then is going to be for us to demonstrate that we're not occupiers, we're not colonizers.
What does the United States of America have to do to prove to the Arab world, the very skeptical Arab world, that they are liberators and not occupiers after the last shot is fired?
Number of things, if I may just count a couple of them. First, we really need to adjust our policies altogether towards the Arab-Israeli conflict. We really must do that. I know we're talking about Iraq, but we are addressing the whole Arab world, and unless we resolve this issue fairly, we are not going to be seen as a friend. We are going to be seen as a foe. Secondly, I think it is very important not to seem to be imposing, dominating, intimidating the Iraqis, but instead to allow a democratic process, elections under the United Nations supervision, and very quickly, so that we do not look like occupiers. And thirdly, I believe there are some hawks here in Washington, in the administration and around the administration, who have thought up this war for reasons that are a little dubious. And I think maybe President Bush might think to ask Mr. Wolfowitz to probably dissolve that defense strategy, defense policy board that is made up of men without, we don't know their agenda, and there is no accountability. Right. And no, we need to do that.
Regina, I hate to cut you off there, but I certainly appreciate your insights. I don't agree with all of them. I think Wolfowitz and those guys are ultimately going to be responsible for the liberation of the Iraqi people.
Let's discuss it another time. I would love to discuss it another time. I don't think they see them as liberators, particularly Wolfowitz and the same group.
All right. We'll talk about that later on.
Thank you very much.
While American forces are poised to take Baghdad, British forces made a decisive move in the south, entering the center of Basra. Up until now, fierce guerrilla attacks have kept the British Marines on the outskirts of that city. But as Tim Ewert of ITN News reports, Saddam's regime now appears to be on the run in Basra.
The British tanks rolled out this morning, 2 weeks after laying siege to this city of 1 million people. From their positions on its outskirts, they rumbled through the city gates. Hundreds of tanks, armored vehicles, and fighting men of the Desert Rats. From the ground, they took out enemy positions. And from the air, they flew in reinforcements.
We had an IED, an improvised explosive device, thrown in over the wall, which took out quite a lot of the windows in the school building that we'd occupied.
Most of the resistance came from small arms fire, from radical militia dressed in civilian clothes. There seemed to be no cohesive fighting force here, and no sign of the feared Republican Guard. Soldiers of the Irish Guards were soon out of their warrior fighting vehicles and on the streets for the first time. The road behind them littered with the shells of burnt-out Iraqi tanks. This was meant to be a lightning raid, but now they're here to stay, and it does appear that some of the locals, at least, are happy to see them, knowing that help and the end of an oppressive regime is on its way. By early afternoon, and flanked by helicopter gunships, British Challenger tanks had shot their way close to the city centre. They're now fortifying their positions and clearing away the last pockets of resistance.
Tonight, the British control most of Basra, but not all of it. They think any significant opposition has been crushed, but they can't be sure. This remains a dangerous place for the troops to be. Tim Hewitt, ITV News, Basra.
And back in this country, the president's approval rating is soaring. The war's a success so far in the eyes of the public, and a political report card's coming up next for our commander-in-chief on day 18 of Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's when we come back.
Halfway between bare bones and ostentatious is where a lot more business people prefer to stay. Ramada, a very good place to be.
Tomorrow at 7:42 a.m., a once-in-a-lifetime business deal will arrive in this office. At 2:06 p.m., a letter of credit worth 3 million euros will move across these lines. And at 3 p.m., 24,000 computer chips will leave this distribution center. Only one company in the world is synchronized enough to make all these things happen. UPS. Commerce. Synchronized.
Don't we need broccoli? I think I need a haircut.
Kids who can't wait to go on everyday errands?
How are we on gas?
Here's why. Bank One introduces Disney's Visa credit card. The new way to turn your everyday spending into magical Disney rewards. Disney's new Visa card.
You don't know what I had to do to get here.
Only from Bank One.
Dave. Larry. How is that Dell consolidation going? TCO's down. Uptime? Highly available. Great. And you? You know, we're still running a proprietary Unix-based system. Right.
A Dell flexible solution with Dell PowerEdge servers and Intel Xeon processors can help manage your enterprise for less. Easy as Dell. Call or go online today.
There are some who live for caring with all they have to give. There are some who will always be there. They dare to care. They dare to cry. They dare to feel. They dare to try. There are some who have the courage to care. There are some.
Be a nurse.
Who dare to care.
A message of caring from Johnson & Johnson.
When you turn in your expense report, act tired and try not to smile. Ramada, a very good place to be.
14 years ago, a female jogger was raped and left for dead in New York's Central Park. No one ever knew who she was or what really happened. Tonight on NBC, all that will change. A Katie Couric exclusive, The Central Park Jogger, tonight, 10/9 Central on NBC.
I'm Natalie Morales. Now the very latest headlines. The military investigating a possible friendly fire incident in northern Iraq. Reports say a U.S. warplane bombed a convoy of Kurdish fighters and U.S. Special Operations Forces. U.S. Central Command says at least 3 people were killed, but Kurdish officials say at least 18 have died. UN relief agencies warn that a health crisis is facing the 5 million residents of Baghdad. Hospitals are overwhelmed and the infrastructure devastated. They say to expect a severe deterioration of the health situation in the days to come. And heavy bursts of machine gun fire could be heard overnight in the Iraqi capital, as well as thunderous explosions from warplanes dropping laser-guided bombs on tanks. Witnesses say the streets are crawling with the black-clad Fedayeen militia and armed loyalists of the ruling Ba'ath Party. And we bring you the latest headlines every 15 minutes on MSNBC and anytime on the web at go to iraq.msnbc.com for complete coverage. And now back to MSNBC Reports with Joe Scarborough.
Welcome back. I'm Joe Scarborough. Now that American troops have surrounded Baghdad, other critical cities in Iraq seem to be falling like dominoes. British forces have finally taken Basra, and now wire services are reporting that coalition forces have also secured Karbala, a city just 50 miles south of the capital. NBC's Dana Lewis witnessed some of the intense fighting going on inside that city today, and he brings us this report now from the battlefield.
In the heart of Karbala this morning, American Bradleys firing 25mm cannons. Soldiers frantically searching for the source of incoming fire. Only a few Iraqi units still trying to put up a fight against overwhelming firepower.
Gun! First we took a mortar round, now there's small arms fire in the area. Troops moving up the road. Helicopters now trying to search, see where the fire's coming from. Is it on a rooftop? Somebody in between buildings? Very difficult to find the source of fire in this environment.
Yesterday, a Bradley was destroyed here in fighting. Today, they take no chances when they find the source of fire. Platoon Sergeant David Wardlow says his Bradley has been shot at 16 times.
We're like hair of our teeth, skin of our teeth, basically getting by it.
Go, 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 go!
Soldiers from the 101st Airborne are sent to search for gunmen inside the buildings. Bravo Company Specialist Brandon Holzer says finding a sniper frustrating, dangerous.
It's just one man running around with one magazine.
And a box of bullets.
A box of bullets, and if he gets found, he drops the gun and runs, hides.
The Bravo Company patrol lasts for 6 grueling hours. Temperature near 100 degrees. People come out of their homes to wave and watch. And today, the U.S. Army and residents of Karbala work together to topple the last symbol here of Saddam's rule. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Karbala.
For a look at the overall progress of U.S. troops in Iraq, I'm joined now by retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona in the War Room. Good to see you again, Rick. I'll tell you, a great week. Just an over-the-top military week as far as success goes. And let's start right here with Basra. Basra has obviously been an absolute trouble spot for American troops and British troops especially. What's happened?
Well, it continues to be a trouble spot. You know, this is Iraq's second largest city, 1.3 million people. It's a Shiite-dominated city, but the resistance is coming from what we're calling the bitter enders. These are the Ba'ath militia and some of the Saddam Fedayeen that are in that city.
Let me stop you right there, because it's very important. One of the reasons people have been frustrated is because it is a Shiite region. And for people that don't know, the Shiite region, and please forgive the map drawing, I'm not great at it, but this is basically the Shiite region, which obviously Saddam's a Sunni Muslim. The Shiites were supposed to just welcome us with open arms. Why hasn't that happened yet?
Well, I believe that the people in Basra would welcome us with open arms if they could. They're afraid. They're not sure we're there to stay. Remember what happened in '91? They believe that we deserted them. So it's going to take some persuasion and some, changes before they actually trust us. Once the resistance is eliminated, I think you'll see a whole new attitude in Basra.
Okay, now let's go to Baghdad, because that's obviously what most people are looking at right now. In Baghdad, we've secured the roads, we've secured the airport. What do we need to do next?
Well, in Baghdad, of course, you've got different communities. You've got the Sunnis and the Shia and living in different neighborhoods. Like you've got a large Shia area up here.
Draw that for us, if you will. Show us where the Shia
area up here, and you've got a Shia area over here, and then over here. And these are pockets that we would regard as maybe friendly.
So if you're the general running this war and you wanted to chop it up like Berlin was chopped up after World War II, those are the 3 areas you'd go first.
That's where I would send my special forces in to make contacts with the local tribal leaders, the local village, the elders, the mayors of these small areas of town, to garner that support that they're going to need to operate effectively in town without having to knock down a bunch of buildings.
Now, do I also understand that there are up to 1 million Kurds living in Baghdad?
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, there's 4 million in the country.
Is that spread throughout the entire city, or are there pockets of...
The Kurds don't tend to be in pockets. They tend to be spread out. But you know, and you've got good Kurds and bad Kurds, if I could use that phrase. You've got some that are loyal to the government, but the majority are not.
All right, thank you so much, Colonel. We appreciate your input, as always. What a difference a week makes. At the beginning of this week, reports claimed that the president was tense and stressed out. Now yet another poll is proving that the American people are supporting the president. The latest LA Times poll out yesterday confirmed his high approval ratings, with 68% approving of what he's been doing in his job, 28% disapproving. And with me now to talk about these results and also the president's handling of the war is Time Magazine's White House correspondent, Jay Carney. Jay, welcome to the show. And how is the war going politically for the president and this administration?
Well, Joe, so far so good. You're right that there's been a tremendous turnaround among the chattering classes in Washington and New York in terms of how they view the president and how he's doing. Those numbers have been strong for the president throughout this conflict. They shot up to the 70% range right away and really haven't bounced back.
So there really hasn't been a Bush bump. This 68% that we saw has been consistent since March 17th, when the president went on TV to declare war against Iraq.
Right. The bump happened when he went to war. All the doubts that we heard expressed, you know, in the elite newspapers and on the media really hadn't filtered down to the public. And of course, it ended so quickly, it never filtered down to the public. So his numbers have stayed pretty strong. Now, it's important to remember that those numbers are high, but they're nothing like as high as his father's numbers were at the end of the first Gulf War. They reached up to 90%. We'll see when this one ends if the president's numbers escalate that high.
And we'll also see, obviously, Jay, whether he's able to hold those numbers like his father wasn't. Now, you talked about the chattering classes. You talked about elite newspapers. Of course, Time's just a startup that you write for. But earlier this week, the New York Times reporter, obviously, Johnny Apple, wrote this pessimistic assessment of the war's progress. And he wrote, with every passing day, it's more evident that the failure to obtain permission from Turkey for American troops to cross its territory constituted a diplomatic debacle. With every passing day, it's more evident that the Allies made 2 gross military misjudgments in concluding that the coalition forces would safely pass Basra and Nasiriyah. Jay, of course, Johnny Apple gives us one of these columns every war now, the Quagmire columns. But, Jay, isn't this an example, once again, of George Bush feasting off of those who underestimate his political abilities?
Well, absolutely. He's always been underestimated, and he has always done well by picking a plan, sticking to it, and forcing it through, and letting the chips fall where they may. He's succeeded so far. Obviously, the problem that we have in the United States is we expect wars to be quick, and when we're watching them unfold live on television, a few setbacks seem disastrous when we never get the full picture, and the president understood that. There's still a lot to come, Joe, obviously. If we get bogged down in a sort of block by block war in Baghdad, or if during the occupation there's a constant harassment from sort of underground guerrillas, this could prove to be a political problem for the president. But right now, the war politically is obviously a big plus for Bush.
Jay, you talked about a couple of problems that the White House has to be concerned about. What do you think they're most focused on right now? When I say they, obviously I'm not talking about the Pentagon or the president, but Karl Rove, whose job it is to worry about the president politically and to cover him. What's he concerned about right now? Is it finding Saddam Hussein? Is it keeping civilian casualties the lowest? What are you hearing around the White House?
Karl is leaving those issues, the specific ones you mentioned, to the people who have to handle them at the Pentagon. Karl's worried about the economy. The political advisors to the president realize that the economy is not looking good. We had terrible job numbers on Friday. Economic growth is anemic. Business investment is low. And they're worried about a situation where they don't get the kind of bump coming out of the war economically that they'd hoped for. The president's economic package doesn't pass in full, and suddenly it's campaign time. You know, it's 6 months from now, and things are still looking bad, and people start forgetting George Bush, the commander-in-chief, and they start thinking, uh-oh, this Bush isn't doing right by me economically. And that's the nightmare for Bush.
Right, and it could be a repeat of '92, and it's the economy stupid. Obviously, Karl Rove understands that probably better than any of us. So, hey, Jay, appreciate you being with us tonight to talk about the president.
Thanks for having me.
MSNBC's continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom continues with Lester Holt. I'm Joe Scarborough, and I'll see you here tomorrow night.
I truly believe that the Iraqi main elements in the Republican Guard understand how badly they are being defeated on the battlefield, and they still have free will. Their commanders still have the opportunity to do the right thing as leaders, to stop supporting a regime that does not deserve their loyalty, to surrender, and to become part of the future free Iraq.
One of the Joint Chiefs of Staff today expressing his hope that members of Iraq's Republican Guard will surrender now that coalition forces have moved into Baghdad. Welcome to our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm Lester Holt. Here's what's happening right now. U.S. forces tightening their grip on most of the roads leading into the Iraqi capital. We'll show you a live look at Baghdad. U.S. troops say U.S. officials say troops are expected to have the city totally surrounded within 24 hours.